Real talk, you've been lied to about rice. Not by your mom, not by the restaurant, by literally every nutrition label and Google result you've ever looked at. You search rice calories, you see something like 365, you panic a little, maybe you put the spoon down. Wrong move. That's not what's actually in your bowl. By the end of this video, you're gonna know the real calorie count of basically every rice. Long grain, sushi rice, sticky rice, basmati, jasmine, brown rice, wild rice, Calrose rice, all of it, gram for gram, raw versus cooked, so you never have to guess again standing in the grocery aisle. And I'm saving the biggest twist for last. The rice everyone assumes is the heaviest, most fattening one on this list is actually the lightest of the entire lineup. Stick around for that one. Let's get into it. Okay, first, the truth bomb everyone half knows but nobody actually explains. You've probably heard some version of rice calories cut in half when you cook it. Cute story. Not even close to the full picture, and I'm about to prove it with real numbers. Here's what's actually going on. Raw, straight-out-the-bag rice sits somewhere around 355 to 370 calories per 100 grams, and cooked rice actually lands somewhere between 97 and 130 calories per 100 grams depending on the type. But why? The second rice hits hot water, it starts drinking it. Aggressively. Inside every single grain there's starch, and when that starch heats up it goes through something called gelatinization. Free vocabulary word, you're welcome, where the tightly packed starch granules crack open and start pulling water in. Dry rice can absorb somewhere between 2 and 3 times its own weight in water while it cooks, sometimes even more depending on the variety. Which, spoiler, is exactly why some rice ends up way lighter than others. We'll get there. So that 100 grams of raw rice doesn't disappear when you cook it. It turns into a noticeably bigger, heavier pile of cooked rice. More than 2/3 of what's sitting in your bowl at that point is literally just water. So if you've ever tracked calories with an app and logged rice as 350 something for a normal dinner portion, you are almost certainly logging the raw number for a cooked plate. That's not a small rounding error. That's nearly triple what you actually ate. How we're measuring. So, fair comparison rules for the rest of this video. Every rice gets measured at 200 grams, a realistic actual bowl of rice serving, and I'll give you both numbers every time, raw and cooked, so you can watch that drop happen in real time, rice by rice. Cooked plain, in water only, no oil, no butter, no stock cubes, because that's not the rice's fault, that's a cooking choice. Let's rank through all 8, starting with the one you already know. Long grain white rice. First up, the default setting. Long grain white rice is the rice most of the planet pictures the second you just say the word rice. Restaurant sides, fried rice, biryani base in plenty of regions, the bag sitting in basically every pantry on earth. The grain itself is slender, roughly 4 to 5 times longer than it is wide, and it's higher in a starch called amylose. Amylose molecules don't link up with each other easily, which is exactly why long grain rice stays soft and separate instead of clumping into a ball. The opposite of what's happening in the sticky rice we'll get to in a minute. Numbers, 200 grams raw comes in at about 730 calories. Cook it, and that same 200 grams becomes roughly 260 calories. This is your baseline for the whole video. Every other rice on this list is getting compared back to this one number, so keep 260 in your head. Sushi rice. The rice behind sushi, onigiri, rice bowls, basically the backbone of Japanese and Korean cooking. Completely different shape from long grain, short, plump, almost round. It's higher in amylopectin, the clingy starch, and that's not an accident. Sushi rice needs to actually hold together when someone's shaping it by hand, so it got bred for exactly that stickiness over generations. Premium varieties like kashi hikari take this even further, prized specifically for how glossy and cohesive the grains get once they're steamed. Calorie-wise though, it's basically neck and neck with long grain white. 200 grams raw runs about 712 calories, and cooked, it drops to around 260, same as the rice we just covered. Proof that the shape and stickiness of a rice have almost nothing to do with how many calories it packs. That's all about starch type and water absorption, which is about to get way more dramatic. Sticky rice, also known as glutinous rice. Glutinous does not mean it has gluten. Zero gluten, none, it's rice. The name is describing the texture, glue-like, sticky, not a protein. This is the rice behind Thai mango sticky rice, Lau Khao Nu, Chinese zongzi, and honestly mochi starts here too, before it gets pounded into something else entirely. It's almost entirely amylopectin, barely any amylose at all, which is exactly why you can mold it into a ball or a cone with your bare hands and it just stays put. No bowl required. And here's your numbers. 200 grams raw is about 740 calories. Actually the highest raw number on this whole list. But cooked, only around 194 calories. Hang on to that, because it's about to completely flip the ending of this video. Basmati rice. The backbone of Indian and Pakistani kitchens, and genuinely one of the only rices on earth you can identify by smell alone before it even hits the pot. That nutty, popcornish aroma comes from a compound called 2-acetyl-1-pyrroline, and basmati produces it in way higher concentrations than regular rice. Scientists didn't even isolate and identify the compound until 1982. High-end basmati also gets aged, sometimes for a year or two before it's ever sold, and the aroma genuinely gets stronger with time. The grains are long and skinny, and here's the wild part. When basmati cooks, it doesn't really get fatter, it gets longer. It can stretch out to almost double its raw length while barely widening at all, a completely different move from every other rice on this list. Numbers: 200 grams raw is around 710 calories, and cooked, it lands at about 242, a bit lower than standard white rice, which tracks with basmati's whole reputation as the lighter, more diet-friendly option in South Asian cooking. Calrose rice, and here's a plot twist, it's not from Japan. It's from California. And it quietly became one of the most eaten rice varieties on the planet without most people ever learning its name. Calrose is over 90% of the rice actually eaten in Hawaii. It's a staple across a huge chunk of the Pacific, and it's the default in a lot of American sushi spots that aren't importing Japanese short grain. Nutritionally, it's basically a twin of short grain japonica, which makes sense since they're close relatives. 200 grams raw comes in around 710 calories, and cooked, it drops to about 260. Jasmine Rice, Thailand's signature export, and the real authentic version actually has its own specific name, Ham Mali, which translates to fragrant jasmine. It shares that same aroma compound with basmati, but the end result on your plate is completely different. Jasmine is slightly sticky and soft instead of staying totally separate, so it clings together just enough to be easy to eat with a spoon or chopsticks instead of a fork. It sits in a weird middle ground texture-wise. It's dry like basmati, not full-on clingy like short-grain japonica, its own lane entirely. The numbers here track almost identically to long grain white and Calrose. 200 grams raw is roughly 710 calories, and cooked, it comes down to about 260. Same energy, same calorie story, completely different smell and mouthfeel, proof that aroma and stickiness are a totally separate conversation from calorie count. Brown rice, and here's a fact that trips a lot of people up. Brown rice isn't its own type of rice. It's not a separate plant, not a separate species, not a separate grain shape. Long grain, jasmine, basmati, short grain, even sticky rice, literally any of them can exist as brown rice. It's just the outer bran is removed during processing of such rice, and that's the reason they appear white, but during processing of the brown rice, only the hard outer shell that is the husk is removed, leaving the brown bran layer right where they are. That bran and germ layer is exactly where almost all the fiber lives, plus most of the B vitamins, magnesium, and manganese, all of which get stripped away when rice gets milled down into white rice. It's also why brown rice takes noticeably longer to cook, and why it's got that chewier bite and nuttier flavor white rice doesn't have. Calories: 200 grams raw is about 734, and cooked, it comes out to roughly 246, a touch lower than most white rice, on top of carrying way more fiber and nutrients along with it. Basically the same calorie deal, better nutritional package. Wild rice. And finally, saving the biggest curveball on this entire list for last. Wild rice technically isn't rice. At all. It's not even in the same plant family as the other 7 types we've covered. It's the seed of a completely different aquatic grass that grows wild in shallow lakes and slow-moving rivers, mostly around the Great Lakes region of North America. That's the dark, almost black, needle-thin grain you sometimes see mixed into rice blends at the store. It's called manuman, the good berry, by the Anishinaabe peoples, including the Ojibwe, Odawa, and Potawatomi, who've hand-harvested it from canoes for centuries using ricing sticks, and who consider it a sacred food tied directly to their history and migration story in the Great Lakes region. On top of that cultural weight, it's nutritionally stacked too, roughly double the protein of regular rice, and it's a complete protein, meaning it has all 9 essential amino acids on its own. Numbers: 200 grams raw comes in around 714 calories, and cooked, it drops all the way down to about 202, one of the lowest numbers on this entire list. Second lowest, actually. Because there's one rice that beats it. And we already met it. Okay. Let's line up every cooked 200-gram bowl side by side and see how they actually stack up. But sticky rice, the dense, clumpy, eaten with your hands, feels heavy in your stomach, actually edges it out for the single lowest calorie count of anything on this list. Lowest calorie rice on this entire list, cooked, sticky rice, at 194 calories. Not wild rice. And a lot of people would have guessed wild rice takes this one, since it gets marketed as the healthy rice, and it's genuinely close, at 202. That's the part that messes with people's heads. Sticky rice feels like the heavier food because of its texture, because of the portion sizes people eat it in, and because in dessert form it usually shows up drowning in coconut milk and sugar. But the plain, cooked rice itself, gram for gram? It's the lightest one here. On the other end, long grain white, short grain japonica, Calrose, and Jasmine are all tied at the top, landing around 260 calories per 200 grams cooked. That's a 66-calorie gap between the lightest rice and the heaviest rice on this list, for the exact same size bowl. Sticky rice comes in roughly a quarter lighter than those four. Not a massive gap in the grand scheme of a whole meal, but enough to matter if you're stacking rice bowls every single day. And here's the part that ties this entire video together. Go back and look at the raw numbers. Every single rice on this list, raw, sits in almost the exact same range. 710 to 740 calories per 200 grams. Practically identical. The differences you actually care about, the ones that show up in your real bowl, only appear after cooking, because it all comes down to how much water each variety's starch structure can pull in. That's the whole story in one sentence. It's not what the rice is. It's what the rice absorbs. So next time someone cooks rice, you have to tell them about the sudden drop in calorie after cooking it, and you know exactly why, all the way down to the starch. Quick question before you go. Which rice on this list surprised you the most? Basmati stretching out instead of fattening up? Sticky rice quietly being the lightest one here? Wild rice not even technically being rice? Drop it in the comments. And if this rewired how you think about your rice bowl, you already know what to do. Share and subscribe. See you in the next one.